There is a dirty word that is often bandied around in trading platform conversations, and that word is repaint. One of the first questions that many people ask about a trading platform indicator is, does it repaint? So in this video, we're going to be discussing repainting. First of all, the bad news: there are some aspects of the sentient FLD indicator that do repaint. But there is also good news. There are aspects or features of the FLD indicator that do not repaint. It's important that you understand which features do and which features don't so that you can work with it. First of all, what is repainting, in case you don't know? Repainting simply means that an indicator repaints. In other words, it changes what it is displaying as time passes. The reason why this is important is that if you are looking at an indicator on a chart, often with the benefit of hindsight, the indicator can be seen to be providing valuable information. In other words, actionable trading opportunities, for instance, when price crosses a particular line, which is, of course, something that we are looking at in the FLD indicator. If the indicator repaints, then what that means is that what you are seeing on the indicator now is not what you would have been seeing at the time that trading opportunity seemed to have been available to you. It is a valid concern, however, it is mostly raised by newbies or inexperienced traders. Professional traders take the idea of repainting into their stride, and that is probably because they understand a little better what the indicator is doing. So that's the purpose of this video. I want to explain the aspects of the FLD indicator that do repaint, and of course those that don't. So let's first of all speak about the aspects of the FLD indicator that do repaint. The first and obvious aspect of the FLD indicator that does repaint is your cycle analysis at the foot of the chart. The cycle analysis is updated each and every bar. So with each bar of new data, the analysis is updated. I'm starting here with a daily chart because there are two ways in which the cycle analysis might be considered to repaint. The first is that on your chart, the analysis actually changes. The second is that between the different time frames, you might get a mismatch in the analysis. Those are two subtly different ways in which the indicator could be considered to repaint, so let's discuss each one of them. The first is if the analysis itself changes. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that having found a trough of a particular magnitude, and here you can see we have a nice neat stack of diamonds, and as I've mentioned before, stacks of diamonds give us a sense of confidence. What might happen is that that stack of diamonds might change. And so at the moment you can see this is a trough of the 40-week cycle. It has a yellow diamond at the top of it. Now what might happen is that in performing the analysis, the indicator decides that actually that 40-week cycle trough should be over here. And what you might find happening is that all of a sudden you have your extra diamonds on top of this trough over here, and they aren't on this trough over here. It can be disconcerting when you see it happening. The important point, however, is that it does not usually materially affect our trading. All that it means is that the trough the price is currently bouncing out of has a slightly different magnitude. You might find that hard to accept, but we haven't yet gone through the trading module, and once you've been through the trading module, I would encourage you to revisit this idea. The concept of the magnitude of a trough changing is something that we have to deal with. Why is that? It's because of the reality of performing a cycle analysis. A cycle analysis is performed to the best of our ability, or to the best of the indicator's ability, using the data that is available to us. When price behaves in a way that is unexpected, then what might happen is that we have to reassess that analysis. It would be very foolish to say that we are not going to allow the indicator to repaint, because having said that this is a trough of the 40-week cycle, we cannot possibly change our minds. Doing that would be really very foolish, because if price action shows that in fact the cycle analysis is wrong, then we must change that cycle analysis. And so in that way, the FLD indicator does repaint. You will sometimes see the analysis changing. Not not very often, I should point out, on our daily chart, but certainly when you're looking at a 1 minute chart, you will notice times when the analysis will change. Of course, it is not only the diamonds that will change on your chart, but it is also the nests of lows. If the analysis changes, then the calculation of these nests of lows must of course also change, because the cycles that we are seeing on our chart will then have a slightly different wavelength. Interestingly, even when an analysis changes, the cycle wavelength often doesn't change that much, and so although the nests of lows will shift slightly, you often won't see very big changes in the nests of lows on your charts. The other slightly more subtle way in which the indicator might be considered to be repainting can be seen when we shift between different time frames. So I'd like to do that quickly here on this chart. You can see that here we have an 80-day cycle trough that has been found in early January. Here is the circle and whiskers for the 20-day cycle trough. As a matter of interest, if we zoom in here and let's get really close into this price action, here is that 80-day cycle trough. Notice, as a matter of interest, these support arrows. I am plotting past interactions between price and the FLD. It makes it very messy, but the reason I'm doing that is because I want to demonstrate something in this analysis. You can see these support arrows. So in fact, price found support at the level of that sequence cycle FLD. Okay, that's very interesting, as price was forming the 80-day cycle trough. But what we're going to look at as we step through the time frames is what is happening right now. Here is our circle for the 20-day cycle trough. The whisker extends over here, and so it is not quite including yesterday's price action. Price came down and dipped below the signal cycle FLD. That's the 20-day FLD. Notice here we are of course expecting a BC category interaction here. We are expecting that signal cycle FLD to provide support. So that's the bigger picture in terms of what is happening with this analysis. Now let's zoom back out again and change time frame. This is the 4-hour time frame, and here we have the 80-day cycle trough, marked of course on our chart at the same position as it is on the daily chart. Here's the interesting thing. Here's our nest of lows for the 20-day cycle trough, still lying ahead of us. Okay, we're still a day or two away from where that 20-day cycle trough is expected. But now here's the point that I want to make. Here is a trough of the 10-day cycle, right? That's the orange cycle on the 4-hour chart. That's a 10-day cycle trough, and that has been found over here underneath this little rather insignificant trough over here. There's a much more significant trough happening here. So this is on the 4-hour chart. Let's now switch to the 1-hour chart. And here we find an interesting mismatch between these two analyses. Here is that 10-day cycle trough, and it has been positioned below this low price. Whereas on the 4-hour chart, we had that 10-day cycle trough below this price low over here. And so there are two things worth mentioning here. First of all, we have a mismatch between our time frames. When we speak about trading, we will discuss this, but it is important to understand that as we step into shorter and shorter time frames, each time frame is focused on providing the best and most reliable trading opportunities on that time frame. The shorter time frames are not necessarily providing the better analysis, but they are providing the best analysis in terms of the trading opportunities you can identify. So that's the first thing that we have happening here. We have a mismatch. The other thing that is happening here is that we almost certainly experienced a repainting of the analysis on this 1-hour chart, because during this period of time, when the 4-hour chart had identified that the 10-day cycle trough was over here, it is almost certain that this hourly chart would also have been displaying that 10-day cycle trough there. What happened was that as price came down below this low point, there was an anomaly in the analysis, and this 10-day cycle trough moved. It would have initially become a nest of lows, and then it would have resolved into the 10-day cycle trough in a different position. The important point is that the indicator does repaint. You need to understand that. You need to also understand that there is no way around it. When you are performing a cycle analysis, that is what you are doing. You are performing the best possible cycle analysis at each moment with the data that you have available to you. Your confidence in the analysis that is performed will have to build up over time, and not being taken by surprise on the occasion when you do see the repainting is an important part of building that confidence. And I hope that understanding why it happens will help you to reach that point sooner. I should point out that this doesn't happen with every single trough all the time. The indicator is not constantly repainting and repositioning troughs. That would be very disconcerting. But it does happen, and I know that when it happens, it can be quite troubling. So hopefully understanding why it happens and realizing that it doesn't happen all the time will help you to build your confidence in the analysis that you're seeing on the chart. As a matter of interest, let's step down one more time frame to the 30-minute time frame. And here the 30-minute time frame, because it is receiving information from the hourly time frame, has also of course positioned its 10-day cycle trough over there in that lower price trough position. Notice how on this 30-minute time frame we have a perfect sequence beginning to play out. Here is our A category interaction as price crosses above the signal cycle FLD, projecting a target up to here which has not yet been reached. And then here is a perfect example of price finding support at the level of the signal cycle FLD, the BC category interaction pair, at the time that that signal cycle trough, the 12-hour cycle trough, formed in the market. Just a reminder that this sequence of interactions that we are seeing also informs the analysis. And so the indicator is identifying that sequence of interactions, and that is helping it to position the 10-day cycle trough over here and positioning you to take advantage of the trading opportunities. Let me just clean this chart up a little bit. There we go. It's a little bit better without those past interactions. So that is the bad news in terms of the repainting that the FLD indicator does. There is one other piece of bad news in terms of repainting, and that has to do with the labels that are displayed for the next interaction. Here you can see a D category label, and here is a BC category label. Of course, as time passes and as price action evolves and keeps interacting with the FLD, or perhaps missing interactions with that FLD, if price had skipped this BC category interaction that we looked at a moment ago, if it had entirely skipped that interaction, then of course the next expected interaction will update as time passes. But what you will sometimes find is if the analysis shifts, if the analysis changes on your chart, then of course your next interaction might not be a D category interaction. It might decide, well, this is going to be an F category interaction. The important thing about this is that it is directly related to the same cause of the repainting in the FLD indicator, the cycle analysis. So the cause of it is understood. And the other important point to note is that we accommodate for that in our trading decisions. And so here we are looking at a D category interaction. When we are considering a trade on the basis of that interaction, we will consider the possibility that it might not be a D category interaction, but it might be an F category interaction. The important thing to bear in mind is that a D category interaction is a short trading opportunity, as is an F category interaction. You will never find a situation where a short trading opportunity changes magically into a long trading opportunity. There isn't that problem. The only thing that might repaint on your chart is whether we label it a D category or an F category. And the same thing with the long trades, either an A category or an E category, for instance. So that's another subtle detail in terms of repainting that I thought I should mention, because you might notice that happening when we discuss trading. We will discover that occurring on our charts. Now, for the good news, because there is good news, the FLD indicator does not repaint the FLD. That is a really important point. I feel like saying it several times. It does not repaint that FLD. traditionally you should know that an FLD is plotted after an analysis has taken place, and the FLD is plotted on the basis of the average wavelength found in that analysis. However, the problem with that is that it causes the FLD to shift whenever there is a change in the analysis. It is the correct way of working with the FLD, but we made a decision with the FLD indicator to not use the correct process. The FLDs that the FLD indicator works with are based upon a fixed wavelength. What that means is that they do not repaint. Even if your analysis changes at the foot of your chart, this FLD line will stay exactly where it is. In other words, this FLD line, which is of course the median price displaced to the right on your chart, will always be displaced by the same number of bars on your chart, no matter what the cycle analysis is telling us. And that is a really important thing, because these targets are calculated on the basis of price interacting with this line. And this line, let me say it again, does not repaint. Okay, so if you see this line in the past, that line was there in the past. And because the targets are calculated on the basis of price interacting with that line, they also do not repaint. And in some ways, that is really all that you need to know about repainting. I mentioned earlier that if you were to ask me, does the sentient FLD indicator repaint, then in all honesty, I would tell you there are some aspects of it that do repaint. But the important things, the FLD lines themselves and the targets that are generated as a result of price crossing those FLD lines, do not repaint. That's a really important thing for you to know. And so here we have a really good example of price interacting with this pink FLD, the signal cycle FLD. And we know with confidence, because that FLD was in that position at that time, that we would have seen these interactions playing out live on our charts. They do not repaint. Here is a trough of 10-day magnitude, and you can see the interactions that preceded and followed the formation of that trough. So even though we did not know that trough was there at the time, we could see very clearly price coming up and finding resistance at the level of that FLD. Can you see that? It's almost magical. Price comes up to the FLD, stumbles, and then goes down with the FLD, gets pushed downwards by that FLD. That is a perfect example of price finding resistance at the FLD. When does price find resistance at the FLD? You will know, of course, that we would label that a GH category interaction pair, where price finds resistance at the level of the signal FLD on its way down into the sequence cycle trough. Over here, price crossed up above that FLD. Again, that FLD was there at that time on that bar. There is no repainting involved. Price crossed up above that FLD. The only thing that might have occurred, I should point out, as that bar was forming, is that the median price of that particular bar would of course change during the formation of the bar. And so the initial target during the formation of this bar might have been ever so slightly at a different level, because we are using the price level at which the median price crosses the FLD. So the FLD was there, but that median price might have varied ever so slightly, but hardly noticeable probably to the naked eye. And so that target was generated, certainly by the time this bar had completed. This target was generated, and it was placed on our charts at exactly that level. That level does not change. Again, for our BC category interaction, we knew that we were expecting the 12-hour cycle trough to form at around about this time probably, and when that trough formed, we were expecting price to find support at the level of the signal cycle FLD. Here again, we have another perfect example of price finding support at the level of that FLD, and again, that FLD was there on those bars. We could have sat here watching it. This is a half-hour chart. We might have been a bit dull watching it for an hour and a half, but indeed price found support at the level of that FLD. The important thing that you need to understand is that at that time that FLD was there. No painting was involved. And so that's the good news. The important aspects of the FLD indicator, in my opinion, involve no repainting. The other aspects of the FLD indicator, the cycle analysis, although of course very important, repaint in a way that is unavoidable and also understandable when we are working with the indicator.